I want to answer a couple of questions that we couldn't get to. And one of them is, someone asked this very fair question: any advice for someone who feels like they would be a burden on the person they are unpacking their anxiety on? Let me give 3 simple answers. Number 1, your pastor's desire for you to unpack your anxiety on them. It's what we get up in the morning to do. I mean that quite seriously. We would love to hear your story, to create a safe place for you to talk about it. We would genuinely love it. Counselors love it. And they get paid money for it, so they're doubly motivated. It's never a burden. Your anxiety is not a burden. And I would just say this, even as you might, whoever is asking this and I don't know, your friends love you and would be glad to carry your anxiety for you. We have a whole group of trained people in this church called Stephen's Ministers who are literally equipped to do this. So I just want to encourage this question. Encourage your friends to share. And if this is you, please share. Would you come and lead us in our second one? Joe, thank you.
I'm going to say a couple things in this one that will address that question as well. So I said there's these, notable, famous biblical passages on anxiety. That was one. We're going to look at another, probably one that you're familiar with. And this is, so if talk 1 was a little bit more focused on the nature of anxiety, this one's going to be a little bit more focused on, okay, what are some things we can do with it, right? And I think we find laid out in this passage in Philippians 4, both explicitly but also implied throughout, some things that we can do with our anxiety. So, let me read this for us. Paul says the following: "Rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. The Lord is at hand. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything, by prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which surpasses all understanding, will guard your hearts and your minds in Christ Jesus. Finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. Think about these things. What you have learned and received and heard and seen in me, practice these things. The God of peace will be with you." So, the question for this talk is, okay, what are some things that we can do with our anxiety that we feel? Whether you're kind of, you're low level or you're like me, award-winning, I'm the president of the club. What can we do with our anxiety? What are some helpful steps we can take, okay, from this passage? Here's the first. Ready? Simply put, name it, okay? Name it. Paul says, do not be anxious about anything. Why would Paul need to write this unless there was, in fact, plenty for us to be anxious about? And there is, okay, in this broken world. So the first step in dealing with the anxiety is recognizing the struggle with it. Take inventory. Am I experiencing these things? Am I experiencing these racing thoughts? Am I experiencing this kind of, upset stomach? Right? This cyclical obsessive thinking and not being able to fall asleep, this kind of snappiness, maybe defensiveness, emotional overwhelm. Am I experiencing some symptoms of anxiety? Let me take a moment, take inventory, name it. Okay, so the river diagram that we looked at earlier, right? You can look at that and go, am I in that optimal zone? Oh, I'm not? Oh, I'm up here? Okay. Well, good that I know that about myself. There's a power in just naming it. I'll give you an example of this from my life. Back about a year ago, my son was in ninth grade, and I got a call from a school, Email from his school, November, so we're like towards the end of a first semester. And I get an email from his school saying that he actually was failing 2 classes, okay? Now, he had only made A's up until this point, okay? So this was a whole new thing, and now we're towards the end of a semester. I had no idea that he was even struggling, and it turns out there were a lot of factors involved in this for sure. But me in that moment, I get that email, and I'm going, okay, after school today, I'm sitting down and talking with my son. Now, we're approaching the time I'm about to sit down and talk with him, and thankfully, I had this thought pop into my head, and it was like, Joe, pull out that river diagram, and let's see where you're at in it. And what I realized was that for the past 2 hours, I had subconsciously been just like ruminating on this whole future. I mean, in my mind, and again, I'm doing work, I'm doing other stuff, but subconsciously in my mind, my son now, I mean, he's in jail in a few years, right? He's never going to have a family. There's no hope whatsoever for his future. Everything is going that direction. Now, I asked myself, Joe, do you want to sit down and have this conversation with your son from this place? No. Or do you want to look at this river? Okay, well, all right. Let me get some curiosity in me. What could be going on, in my son? What's this experience like been for him? Get some empathy in me. Notice in the river, awareness of boundaries. There's still boundaries. So that means I can still go, hey, here are going to be some of the responses from me as a parent to this being, an issue in terms of school. So it's not like all of a sudden we're not actually bringing truth and boundaries and discipline in. But if I'd gone in that first place, I imagine I probably would have said some things that I would have regretted saying. Going in, though, from that place of the river, I'm actually able to listen but still be firm. Okay, so that's one example of, just in kind of everyday life when we can get into those anxious places. I'll give you an example, though, from years ago. In the height of my anxiety, and this will relate to that person's question from earlier, the power of naming it and naming it for others. One of my counselor had told me, like, hey, listen, you got to have people in your life that you're just open with sharing with them. Hey, I'm feeling really anxious, or hey, this is really going on in my heart right now. So I was in my 20s, went with the church that I was interning at. We went and did a 2-week mission trip in China, okay? And we go into this Pizza Hut in China. When I say Pizza Hut in China, I mean it was a Pizza Hut. And it was in China, okay? And we go into this Pizza Hut in China, and I start to feel this sense of, I'm going to have a panic attack. Like, I'm going to have a panic attack. Now, if you know anything about panic attacks and people who have them, the one place that you don't want to have a panic attack is in a Pizza Hut across the globe from your home where it's safe, right? So I'm in Beijing going into this Pizza Hut going, I'm about to have a panic attack in front of all of these people. And I just remembered, kind of what my counselor had said. And I go up to a couple of these friends on the trip, and I said, hey, guys, here's the deal. Joe's probably about to have a full-on meltdown. Like, he's going down. I'm going to be laying on the ground in just a minute. People are going to be freaking out. You just need to know this is normal. Just a part of me. And it's just a panic attack, and it'll pass, but I'm just letting you know. And, now I'm joking right now. I was not feeling at all in a joking mood. Anybody who's experienced panic attack, knows that. But I tell them this, and they say to me, Joe, we're good. Like, you do whatever you need to do. We're here for you, and it'll be okay. We'll take care of whatever needs to be taken care of. You're going to be fine. Do whatever you need to do. Now, do you think I had a panic attack? I didn't. Okay? Part of the reason, I think, in part, was naming it. Just naming it and naming it to others. And in letting it be, hear me, a holy burden. because the person who asks, I don't want to be a burden. But Paul says, no, bear one of those burdens, right? We are supposed to take them. And I said, hey, I need you to take it. And they took it, and it helped, okay? So step one is name it. Step two, examine it. Do not be anxious about anything. So what's the anything? What's the anything for you? Because it may not be purely circumstantial. It may not be purely surface level. It may not be the thing that you think it is. It may not be the thing from today. It may actually go back. Maybe a part of your story. Maybe something that's still kind of got a hold of you that you're still hanging on to. One of the things I do with my clients, I think it's important for everybody to do, some sort of story work. Some sort of story work, looking back previous chapters in your life. Are there any things that happened, any things that you went through, any things that you dealt with where you learned or you vowed or you promised and then, but this is how now I'm going to handle things in life. And now, in this stage of your life, that strategy is not working anymore and that event is still taking hold of you. If so, dealing with anxiety involves dealing with that, not just today. When I first went into counseling, I went in, said anxious about health concerns, just general dread, fear of the future, fear of being able to take care of my family, things that, typically people would say they're probably anxious about. And my counselor at one point, a couple sessions in, said, tell me a little bit about your story. Tell me a little bit about your family. And I remember saying to this counselor, I said, well, my parents got divorced when I was in 8th grade, but it was actually a good thing. Spent, half the time with each, felt like my parents were really invested and really cared for me. And I look back and I'm like, I actually think that this was probably a really good thing in my life. Try pulling that in a counseling session. See how it goes. The next several months, right, we're unpacking the decimation of my universe in my, 12, 13-year-old story and the impacts that has on me and the vows that I made to, these two people can't figure out life. I must. And then the impact in which that was still having on me in my mid-20s. I'm going, it's on me. I've got to figure all this out. So, do not be anxious about anything. I only thought I was anxious about my circumstances, health, job, relationships. Turns out the anything that I was anxious about went back more than a decade. And that's the piece that needed unpacking. So don't just name your anxiety, examine it, unpack it, do some counseling, get some help. Somebody to help you look at those places that maybe you've never examined. I had a newly married client. He was just so wrecked with anxiety about an unknown future, this future in which his wife was going to decide that she was just tired of him and she wasn't going to want to be with him anymore. She didn't like him anymore and she was going to leave him. He was just, everything kind of came back to that. Like, oh my gosh, is that where she's going with this? And I said, hey, one session, I said, have you ever experienced this feeling before? Like, do you remember this from maybe another time in your life? And he said, I'm thinking of something I haven't thought of in a while. He said, I remember a time, he said, I was in 2nd grade. Now, both of his parents had completely checked out. He was living with his grandparents. So it was a sense of abandonment, right? And he's living with his grandparents, 2nd grade. He says, I remember walking home from school one day to my grandparents' house, and I get to the front door, and the door's locked. And I start knocking on the door, and nobody's coming. Now, his grandparents, they're down the street, they're visiting with a neighbor, right? But he's standing at this door, and now he's banging on the door. And he said, and I remember at one point, I started shouting, does anyone want me? Do you think that memory popping into his head at me asking him a question, have you ever felt this before? Do you think that's a coincidence, or do you think there's a sense in which this earlier chapter of his story in this instance is still playing out today in some ways? And might that need to be dealt with, Jesus invited into it, and then reframed kind of how he's thinking about his relationships today? So we got to unpack, we got to examine, right? Step 3. So name it, examine it. Step 3 is pray it. Pray it. This is the piece, right? Paul says, do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication. This is the piece where, mental health practitioners, they might squirm. Are you saying, Joe, that we can just pray our anxiety away? Yes and no, okay? No in the sense that God isn't asking you only to pray about your anxiety. Right? There's other things he's laid out for you to be a part of this journey. No, also in the sense that it's pretty frustrating, it is, but God doesn't tend to just respond to our prayers of him completely changing our circumstances around like that overnight, right? It's not how he tends to work with us. But yes in the sense that we're called to take all of our concerns to him and pray for things. So the same way that I pray for my mother who's currently dealing with chronic pain, okay, which is awful, and I'm lifting her up in prayer, I would also be praying for my own or somebody else's anxiety. And yes, also in the sense that we live in a spiritual world. There's unseen. There's things going on. Do you think the enemy would be interested in utilizing things that could get into our stories and into our souls at kind of this psychological level, and even specifically as it relates to things like anxiety? Of course he would. And so we would be foolish not to take our requests and concerns to God. It would be like living as if there isn't this unseen world. Okay? I was, John and I were talking about this the other night. Had one of my friends and was a boss at the time visiting me when I lived in Los Angeles. We went to lunch on this rooftop of a hotel in Los Angeles, and packed. There's a pool, people laying out by the pool, restaurant. We're sitting there, okay? And I look over his shoulder and I say, what is she doing? And he turns around and he looks and he goes, I don't know what she's doing. And then he turns back and looks at me. And while he's looking at me and I'm looking over his shoulder, I see her step off of the building. I am the only person on that rooftop that saw this happen. Oh, and I forgot to mention, she looks over at us before she does. And there's a whole lot we could go into and kind of like what the brain does with that in a minute. That's not your first thought when you see that happening. You're thinking other scenarios. Is there a ledge? Did she drop something? Is she going to reach for it? Whatever. But what stuck with me for days, weeks, was the fact that meanwhile, people are laying out by this pool. They're reading their magazine. No one had any idea, and I wouldn't have either if she hadn't been right in my line of sight. She's caught up in immense spiritual darkness. We are living in a world of blindness, effectively. Nobody sees it. But there it was, right? That's our world. That may sound like kind of an outlier story. That's our world. That's what's going on beneath the surface. And so to not employ prayer in these concerns of mental health, I think would be just foolishness. Paul says, let your requests be made known to God. What are your requests? What are your requests? And I would guess, maybe not the person who actually sent that text, but somebody else in here, that there's a hesitancy in you at times to even burden God. He wants to hear it. He wants to hear all of it. What are your requests? They just feel too small. No. He wants to hear them. I prayed them before. No, he wants to hear them. Bring it all to him. Pour out your heart to him as though he's right there with you, because he is. Years ago, I was doing a morning devotional with my children. I remember asking my kids, if God was sitting here with us right now, what is one thing you would ask him? And my daughter took home the prize because she said, I'd ask him for a hug. Maybe that's your request when you're in a space like this. There's a time in my life where it was, still is, but I remember a night in particular, that was my request. You may not be comfortable with this, in this Presbyterian church, right? I'm ordained in this denomination, but I'm a little bit of a closet charismatic. Guess I just came out. But I was laying in bed one night, and that was my request, just feeling so burdened, so weighed down, so anxious. God, I need a hug. And it was like this immediate sense of almost like a weighted blanket, laid over me. What is your request? Will you present it to him? Will you be honest, fully? Take it to him. But sometimes the peace of God that guards us isn't felt. Sometimes it isn't felt. It's happening, it's there, but it's not felt, even though we wish it was, which means sometimes we have to actually argue with our emotions. Accept them, yes, but debate them. That's step 4, debate it. Step 4 is debate it. Just because you don't feel the peace of God in a particular moment doesn't mean that he is not with you. Remember Mary at the tomb of Jesus? She's standing outside the tomb of Jesus. His body is gone. He is dead, and he has been stolen in her mind. She is weeping. Why is she weeping? Because she loves him, and he was with her. And now he is dead, and somebody has defiled his memory by stealing the body, and she is weeping. And where is he during that weeping? Standing right behind her. Now, what that tells us is that sometimes it can feel as though he is a million miles away, and he is actually standing right with us. So we cannot always trust our feelings. We wish that he would interrupt those feelings with his sensation of peace at all times. He does it at times. He doesn't do it at all times. It doesn't mean that he's not near. And so we got to debate our anxiety. When anxiety says God's abandoned you, he's abandoned you. His promises, they are null and void for you. All that you fear, it will surely come true. We've got to preach to our hearts something different. No. He is with me. There's never been a moment that I haven't been his beloved child. He is taking care of me. He will take care of me. He is going to bring all of his promises to fruition. Look at how Paul tells us to debate our anxiety. Verse 8, he says, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there's anything worthy of praise, think about these things. When your mind is stuck on fearful thoughts, anxious thoughts, push back with thoughts like the ones you read here in Philippians 4:8. It's a part of this too. So I'm saying preach to yourself. You know that studies have shown that the average person speaks in terms of inner speech, speaks upwards of 4,000 words per minute to themselves. 4,000 words. To give you an idea, I'm kind of a word count person in terms of when I put one of these talks together. Each of these are about 4,000 words. Okay? Every minute, you're preaching a 35-minute sermon to yourself. Now, is it any good? Right? Maybe you're tuned into the wrong podcast. Maybe you need to change the station. You need to hear something different. Okay? Maybe you need to preach, things like freedom, the gospel, God's hold of you, God's promises, his provision, his grace. So you need to be active because you're already preaching. It's just that your sermons are probably terrible. Right? So let's get better. Preaching a better word to ourselves. Talk about one more piece. With your anxiety, you got to name it, you got to examine it, you got to pray it, you got to debate it, and you got to replace it. Couple actions a couple of practices that Paul exposes they are almost antithetical to anxiety. That these practices, when we are putting them into practice, they counteract at some level our anxiety. They don't leave much room left for our anxiety. One of them Paul mentions in verse 6. We tend to blow right past it because we don't know what to do with it, but it's hidden in there. Do not be anxious about anything, but in everything by prayer and supplication with thanksgiving. With thanksgiving, let your requests be made known to God. Seems out of place, right? Because when you're feeling anxious, you probably think of your prayer more like a prayer of lament. You probably don't think, well, I'm not praying prayers of thanksgiving. I don't feel thankful. That's the point. That's the point. Thanksgiving is one of those practices, those actions that the more we do it, the more we can actually reap the benefit of experiencing it and feeling it. And when we're in a state of anxiety, it is this beautiful balm that can be put on where we can actually go, you know what? I need to cultivate some thanksgiving here. This is a really interesting detail in Daniel's story, the famous story of Daniel in the lion's den. When he finds out that he's about to be thrown into that lion's den, it says he goes and prays. It doesn't say, and he prayed 3 times with great petition and supplication. It doesn't say he prayed 3 times that God would deliver him from the mouths of the lions. What it actually says is, 3 times a day, Daniel got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God. See, I think maybe Daniel had discovered this at some level. That when we're in a state, anxious, fear, it is a place to practice gratitude. Not deny our emotions, not deny the fear that is real there, but put on top of it, God, I am thankful for you. I'm thankful for your goodness, your character, the things that you are doing, and practice that gratitude. Do you practice gratitude in your thoughts, in your conversations, in your prayers? As we become more and more aware of what we're thankful for, our anxiety, it kind of begins to step back a bit. So, what do we want to try and replace it with? Thanksgiving. There's another practice. Replacing our anxiety with joy. Joy, like thanksgiving, is both an emotion and a practice. Both of them are emotions that are fed by the practice of them. Paul starts this whole section with the verbal form of the word joy, kairo. Kairo, rejoice, he says. Rejoice in the Lord always. Even as you're in a place of anxiety, especially maybe as you're in a place of anxiety, practice experiencing the joy that is yours in Christ. Heard somebody once say, joy is the happiness that does not depend upon what happens. Happiness very much tied to circumstances, very much tied to what is happening. Joy can transcend it. Okay? A couple years ago, plenty of unhappiness in my life. Moments sprinkled throughout, of incredible joy. Joy that transcended what I was experiencing, what I was going through. Joy that could only be found in Him and in the kind of community that He puts around us. All right, so how do we practice joy? Where do we get joy? Well, there's an old acronym out there for what joy is all about. Super cheesy, okay? Unless, of course, like you've been using it in a Bible study or something, then it's profound. But it actually, I think there's something to it that it's helpful to remember, and I found it helpful. Joy, Jesus, others, yourself. Jesus, others, yourself. Here's the implication. And I alluded to this in the previous session, when I'm caught up in what He's doing, what He's doing in others and for others, okay? And I'm not just obsessed with my own state of affairs and how I'm feeling in every moment, but I'm actually propelled out of that for the sake of others and for the sake of what I have in Christ. It reduces that anxiety that I'm carrying. Joy can begin to replace it. Joy can begin to creep in, okay? This joy that grows. that transcends circumstances. So, name it, examine it, pray it, debate it, replace it. This is the most important bit, though, okay? It's not a line on your notes, but it's implied throughout this whole passage and everything we've been talking about. God has not abandoned you. God has not abandoned you. In this moment, whatever this moment is for you, He's not abandoned you. He's doing something. You may not know what He's doing yet. We don't always know. Sometimes we end up finding out. Sometimes even then we don't. But He's at work. He's doing something. And He may even have, you being here tonight and starting to think through some of the things that maybe you carry, could that possibly be Him stirring something up for the purpose of something in your life? Maybe even for the purpose of what you are going to do in somebody else's life. He is at work. He's doing something, and He has not abandoned you. He's up to something, even with your mess and my mess. One of my favorite stories, close with this, we'll do a little more Q&A tonight, but one of my favorite stories, old story of the famed old Polish pianist Jan Paderewski. Story of Paderewski showing up to play this big concert hall. It's, filling up, people are coming in. And a mother decided to bring her 8-year-old son because she was hoping that her son might get more and more interested in piano. Up to this point, he'd only learned chopsticks, and she wanted him to keep with the lesson and keep getting better at it. Well, she turns away at one moment. She's talking to a friend, and then she looks up on the stage, and her son is walking on the stage. And now he's sitting down at the maestro's piano. And now he's playing chopsticks for everyone. Okay? And so now you got patrons, going, what's going on here? It's not the most, entertaining song in the world, right? Chopsticks. And then they're wondering, what is Paderewski going to do? What's this great maestro going to do? Well, here he comes, strolling out from the wings, walking over to the piano. What's going to happen? The boy's playing chopstick, doesn't see him coming, doesn't hear him coming, doesn't know he's coming. 2 hands wrap around the boy. Paderewski starts improvising around this boy playing chopsticks. And as the story goes, the whole time he's playing, he's whispering in the boy's ear, I'm going to get you for this, kid. No, he's whispering, hey, just don't quit. Keep playing. Keep playing. We're going to do something that nobody will ever forget. And sure enough, that's the thing. Everybody remembered that night. Not one of his many masterpieces. It was when the great maestro took the great mess and turned it into the great masterpiece. That's our maestro. That's what he's doing with your story. You're like, what is this in front of me right now? His hands are around you, and he's turning it into something amazing. And you maybe can't hear or see the whole score yet, but one day you will. Until then, I think we can trust him. Let's take some questions. Invite John up.
Joe, were Jesus' emotions in the garden anxiety and his response a lesson in how to deal with it? It's a great question. I don't have any idea. Were Jesus' emotions in the garden anxiety or fear? And how is that an example to us? And that's going to be a tough theological question for both of us, honestly.
Yeah, so I'll take a crack first and then listen to what he says. Jesus in his humanity, sinless humanity, I would probably label that a sinless anxiety, right? And experiencing kind of the physical symptoms of that. And I think if we can afford to Jesus anything to be anxious about, it would be the separation from the Father, who is known for all eternity, and the weight of human sin. In terms of the second part of the question, kind of a lesson in what to deal with it.
He prayed. I mean, just what you said. I mean, he prayed. Like he in his pain, I think it was sadness more than anxiety, because he's worried. He does not want to drink the cup of God's wrath. He's kept the law. He's perfect, and he's perfectly in love with his Father. And it's going to be poured on him. It's sadness. But he prays in the presence of it, like you say.
But the other thing he does, he tells those fools to stay awake and pray with him. There's an invitation. There's an invitation to people to carry his burden with them in community. Now, they're not great friends. And I'll add to John's answer earlier about any of you, hey, your friends love you. They do love you. They also aren't Jesus, right? So we can't expect that when we pour out our burdens on other people, we can't expect perfection in terms of the loving response. Sometimes people do that. They go all or nothing. They go, okay, well, now I just can't trust anybody ever again. Mm-hmm. And no, God has given you a gift that this day is an imperfect gift, and it is that imperfect friend who imperfectly listens to you and imperfectly responds to you and maybe subtly judges you, and they wish they didn't, and they didn't know they were doing it, but they kind of did. And you feel a little bit of that sting, but that is part of God's gift to you today. It's imperfect. The perfect is in him, but he's put somebody there to listen to you. And just some are better than others, but none are the best.
How would you recommend separating anxiety caused by ADD and dysgraphia with other types of anxiety?
So I'm not as learned up on. I don't treat anybody currently who is in the ADHD. That being kind of their main focus and its impact on anxiety. But I do have a couple of family members who that is absolutely their experience. It is a part of their. And usually can kind of go hand in hand with some OCD symptoms as well. That ADHD and OCD kind of deal together can lead to a lot of kind of breaking down and unraveling when the things that they're expecting to go one certain way, they don't. And so I don't know if I'm probably not equipped enough to give a great answer to that question.
That's a hard one. I would just add that anxiety is both a psychological reality, it's real, and it's a physiological reality. So brain chemistry matters, exercise and sleep matter. I mean, so that's some of that answer. There is that. The next question is harder, and I'm interested, Joe, to just bam. Is anxiety sin?
Is anxiety sin? The commandment is to not worry. We got to do something with that.
Yep.
Okay?
Yeah.
But what we don't want to do is make the mistake of assuming all emotions could either be good or bad, right? I think there's something to do with the emotion, or something to do with the motivations underneath them. If there's something physiological, like you mentioned, that is the main proponent of the anxious symptoms that I'm feeling, result of the brokenness and sinfulness of our world, yes. Can I pinpoint that specific moment as like a sin that I am actively stepping into? That becomes a lot more complicated.
And I would add, you and I are really agreeing, anybody who's had a heart attack or had heart problems, you immediately become depressed. What they've discovered is when you have a problem with your heart, all this stuff is released, which just works into depression. And anybody who's had it will talk about it. And so that's sort of the result of the fall. That's not a result of, I'm going to be dramatic, I did something foolish that's brought anxiety on me, right? But the other side of this is not true, but someone may have used a lot of cocaine and drugs in college, which created this anxiety. Now they're past it, and their anxiety comes out of that. That's a different kind of sin. That's the sin that originated in me. So it is a sin, but I'm with him. You got to be careful to go, what's a sin? Let me eliminate it. There is a right anxiety walking in the woods in Tucson when you hear a sound, period. Rattlesnakes, javelina, so There's some fight or flight there.
So you don't trust God with rattlesnakes?
No, I don't trust God with rattlesnakes. I want to be super clear about this.
Yeah.
All animals, including your cats and dogs, go with us into heaven to be revisited and enjoyed, but not rattlesnakes. No.
Let me say one more thing about that question. Just from like a personal standpoint, every single worship service that I've ever been a part of that has a liturgy of confession, and then they say, take a few moments for silent confession, fear and anxiety is always one of the things that immediately comes to my mind. So I personally view my struggle with it as something that needs to be redeemed and fixed.
I'm laughing at Joe. This is old friendship laughing. That's not mocking. We know each other really well.
Yeah.
Joe tells me his anxious spots, and I won't share them with anybody, but they tend to be very beautiful spots I would not have imagined, I might say. They're all thinking I'm blowing you up right now, but I'm not. How would the imperfect friends of the anxious who have been trying to help them walk through know when to tell them to seek professional help? Okay, you're helping a friend, and you realize this isn't working. How do you know when that's happening? It's not working.
Well, let me speak first of all to just kind of trying to be an imperfect but, growing in love friend. If you don't know any other words, the 3 words, tell me more, those are your words. So they'll keep you from rushing to try and fix somebody. Nobody's sharing their anxiety with you for you to fix them. No offense. They don't think you can. And they just don't want to be alone in it. And they want somebody who cares. And they want and it's the same for depression, the same for other things that we struggle with. But even if outwardly what they're saying sounds like, give me some advice, they're not asking for advice. That is a cover over their scared vulnerability to just say, will you be with me in this? That's what they're asking for. And so find ways to just be with them, by saying things like, hey, tell me all about it. Tell me more about it. I just want to listen. Wish I had answers for you. I don't, but I have a presence and I want to be with you in it. And I'll just sit and just listen, To that question, consider, this is where emotional intelligence is really important. You got to know what's the relationship like that you have with this person. Is it something that can be received? Is it something that you can speak to them in love? I would pray about it first, probably talk to some people about it first before you then go and present it to them. Make sure that it's just done in love and that the way you're communicating it sounds as if it's done in love when you say, hey, I want to be here for you. Whenever you need me, I will. Let's keep doing this. I also want this for you. What do you think about this?
Often I say this as a pastor who took counseling classes. Often if I'm with someone, there comes a point where I say, it's been a really privilege to walk with you in this. What's presenting and what you're feeling is really large. I think it would be better for you to go to a professional counselor because this might be a year of work. I would give you that time, but I don't think I could get you there the way a professional could. So it's not a rejection, it's just an admission like, hey, this isn't a Band-Aid, this is stitches. So, and if they feel uncomfortable, I'll keep going. But often it's like, hey, there's a lot of work here that needs to be done. And even our church will say, if you can't pay for it, we'll help you. So I think there is a time to hand it off and just say, I'm with you, and you want to come back and process that. But this feels like you've dug up something that's worth digging up, and it's hard, and you now need professional or experienced counseling.
And I think that's the distinction between being a pastor in that setting and being a friend in that setting, because I think what a friend says, hey, I want to continue to walk alongside you as a loving friend as you begin this journey of counseling. Whereas, as in a pastoral role, we do have to, in some of those times, go, hey, there are things that I want for you that you need to, go and get outside of what you can get here.
Are apprehension and anxiety symptoms?
Is apprehension an anxiety symptom?
Yeah, I think according to your chart, they are. I think your chart is saying, when I see these, they're a symptom of something else. I'm not.
Yeah,
I'm
I mean,
not
I
in
would-
the river.
Yeah, I mean, if I was sitting with whoever asked that, I'd probably, can you paint a picture for me of what apprehension means to you and kind of what you're thinking about to have a definitive answer on that? But probably.
I'm reading this because somebody gave it, and thank you for giving it because you said what Joe and I. You're saying here better what Joe and I said poorly. Oftentimes, a medical condition will initially present as anxiety. That is not sin. That is a psychological warning shot to a bigger concern. Illustration, I was standing where Joe was standing talking on my phone with Britton Wood when my chest tightened, my breathing stopped, and my left arm hurt. So I did what any rational male would do and drove myself to the hospital thinking I was having a heart attack. When I got there, they immediately took the blood, put me on the thing, and the lady said, "You're not having a heart attack now, you have to wait an hour." So I went back out in the emergency room, and this really young doctor who looked sick came in with his glasses and his ill-fitting clothes and said, "I think you have an inflamed esophagus. It's going to present constantly as a heart attack for you, and you're going to feel like you're having anxiety attacks. Have you had any?" I said, "Interestingly enough, I've had 2, and I can't figure out." He goes, "It's your esophagus." That's an example of a physical thing presented as anxiety and a heart attack. Point 1, when you're having a heart attack, do not drive yourself to Northwest. Northwest is fine. Have a professional other than you drive yourself to the hospital. That's all I would say. That's a good word from somebody. Joe, somebody's asking this, and I love this question. Do you give any different or additional counsel for specific anxieties like speaking in public?
I mean, I would say yes and no. No in the sense that, like I don't have like a stream of kind of seeing those specific, types of people who have a very defined, anxious modality. But anybody who I'm talking to who's dealing with anxiety, kind of wherever it manifests, we're going to talk about kind of why is it showing up in that place. So the person who is afraid of speaking in public, first of all, so is everyone, right? So we got to kind of normalize it at first, right? That's, and then, we can get to maybe the bottom of, is there an experience in the past that has led to that? And then even go into some, okay, can you walk me through some of the thoughts that are popping into your head when you're going to do it? So there's kind of a cognitive behavioral approach that can be employed at that point. There's some story work that can be brought in. There's systematic desensitization, which is something for people who have like phobias that can be brought in, which is actually the worst news in the world. It's basically, hey, you need to go and do that thing that you're incredibly terrified of. And I've got plenty of stories of that in my own life with things that I have phobias of. I do have some phobias. I know it's shocking, but I just want to let you know. So, yeah.
And I think if it's a safe thing, the more you do it, the less afraid you get of it. Before COVID, I just could not really bear to hear myself preach or watch it. I don't even think about it now. We had to record so much in COVID. I had to edit it. That it literally just changed for me. It was so repetitive. I mean, A, I got comfortable with how bad I looked preaching to myself. B, I got used to my voice sounding completely different, right? You hear yourself completely different. So there's some of that just, and I actually stand on the edge of my only 8-foot roof more and more, and I'm less scared of heights. It just helps to sort of see that I don't die when I stand on the edge of an 8-foot roof. I mean, there's some of that there. So, yeah. I think that's it, unless y'all want to send me another one. I will say this. Someone said, and I want to add to this. I'm not finding it. Thank you for the questions. Both Spurgeon and Luther really struggled with depression. Luther's wife used to walk into his room dressed in black and would say, "What are you doing?" He would say, "What are you doing?" She goes, "Well, God must be dead by the way you're acting." Maybe don't marry that woman, but Luther would go into these dark places, and Spurgeon does it. The person here I'm sorry I could pull it up, but Spurgeon has this quote that says, "There are dungeons and cellars below depression." It's because he experienced it. And I would just say it's been interesting as a pastor to read so many pastors struggle with that. It's just a weird job to be a pastor, to stand in front of people. The hardest thing about being a pastor is you have to sort of be, how do you balance like normalcy and this ideal of Christianity? And the answer to that is grace. But there is a sort of a history of depression among pastors, and I would just say that's very true. But you also, I think God subjects you as a pastor to it, so you'll understand your people. You just you need to understand what's kind of going on with people. So, hey, Joe, thanks. We are going to, well, there's one more. Somebody, congratulations. John Bunyan basically had OCD anxiety. That's true. That was from Essie, and Essie was not the one who sent the other one. Thank you, Essie. I can call out Essie because we're friends. Hey, we're going to be back in here tomorrow at 9 a.m. sharp. I'm sure there'll be some coffee. We look forward to you. Let me pray you out of here. As we go home, Father, go with us. Bake into us your command, do not be anxious. And bake into us these things you have led us to in the scriptures to walk in our anxiety. We pray this for the sake of Jesus. Amen.